Hey guys, welcome back to the Disciples channel with me, James and Marcus, and today we're joined by a very special guest, probably the most talked about Yu-Gi-Oh player at the moment, two-time YCS champion and now world champion, Paulie Aronson.
Woo!
How are
Hey
you doing,
guys,
Paulie?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Happy to be on.
Yeah, we're really lucky to have you on. I'm so happy like a TCG player won it because we haven't had it for a while, and now we can get a lot more insight from someone, from our side of the world, talking about our game.
Yeah,
Just
definitely.
just quickly, do you have any shout outs to give before you kind of start the podcast? Anyone you want to thank?
Yeah, shout out to my team, High Frequency Games. Hanyi's like one of my best friends, and he helped me test like a ton for Worlds. I always give him a huge shout out, and my other teammates, they're really cool. And yeah, just everyone who helped me test for the event because we did a lot of testing. And it's always good.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
where would we be without teammates, and people to help us? I don't think anyone could win an event
Exactly.
without anyone.
No, I think that'd be really rare and impressive.
So I guess we wanted to go over Worlds first.
Yeah.
Marcus, I know you had specific questions that you kind of wanted to go over.
Yeah, I really wanted to know about your Worlds preparation. I know you spoke a lot about it on Pat's podcast, but I kind of wanted to have maybe a couple questions. I was slightly testing a bit with Jess going into Worlds. I didn't have much time to play the format, so I didn't think I was a good testing partner, more so bits of theory here and there. But yeah, like how was your prep into Worlds? Was it different for any other YCSs? I can imagine the tournament environment is like 30 or 28 amazing players, the best players in the world, and I guess you might have to approach it differently. The round structure is different. So yeah, I just wanted to hear more about.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of approach it similar to other events, like an event where there's a brand new format, similar to when a set releases or a ban list just dropped. Like, it was a big format change because it was. I think we made a list of like 17 or like 15 to 20 decks that were like potentially viable options, and so there's so many choices, and like a lot of them were really good. So it's a wide open format, and because it's such a small tournament, so closed, and each person kind of wants to be somewhat exclusive and doesn't really want to share. Like everyone wants to be kind of like secretive, right? So it's like you don't really know what anyone else is doing. So you're going in to a broad, diverse format, and you're going in blind essentially. So it was challenging, but I did work together with a lot of the other players, so it wasn't like too blind, but it was definitely a lot. I did a lot of preparation for it. As I've said before, like, the day after Nats, when I qualified, I pretty much just focused from that point out on just putting everything into testing for Worlds. Like, my birthday was like 2 days after Nats, and like my friends wanted to take me out. My parents wanted to take me out for my birthday, and just my friends wanted to like go do something fun. And I was like, I can't. I have to stay home. I have to play test every day, the rest of the month.
I mean, it paid off.
That was all I did. Yeah, it did. That was one of the cool parts because I really do try to put a lot of heart and time into the game when I'm preparing for an event, and it's always really awesome to see it like pay off.
Yeah, I can always imagine before you go into the event, like maybe you play in the tournament. There's definitely tournaments where I've played and not done well, and I think, oh, maybe if I just spent those extra 1 or 2 days, and then it's a slight feeling of regret. I don't know if you maybe had the same thought about it going.
I do. I mean, even with the amount I tested, there was like I still felt like, damn, I probably could have tested more. And it's just because we're going. I will say every event I've ever done well at, I've always gone into the event thinking I was going to do badly, feeling like, oh, I didn't prepare enough. Like there's this matchup is a bad matchup, this matchup is a bad matchup. What am I going to do about this? And then, but like sometimes it works out and you get there and you are more prepared than you think. And then other times, I've also always found that any tournament I went into like feeling really confident, where I thought my deck was like really good and I thought I was going to do really well, I've ended up doing really bad. And I think the correlation is because if like, at least for me personally, if I'm that confident, that means I haven't actually tested enough to just to be able to recognize all of the actual weaknesses and bad matchups that I do have. Whereas like when I'm not feeling confident, it's because I've thoroughly tested enough to actually have already recognized all of the weaknesses. And like, so I feel less confident, but I'm actually more prepared. Whereas when I'm feeling confident, it usually means I didn't actually prepare enough. I don't know if anyone else has that correlation, but I've noticed that for sure for myself.
100%. I kind of call this concept like paranoia, like especially when I'm testing, looking for people to test with. Like sometimes you talk to people and they're like, yeah, I've got it all figured out. My deck's solid. And then you speak to some other friends and like, oh, maybe this small thing I could look at. Maybe this other tech card I could change. Maybe there's another deck. And this paranoia always leads you to trying to get more information of the format, maybe more information in your
Exactly.
deck. And it really does keep pushing you closer to maybe the best
Mm-hmm.
result. Whereas like if maybe you're
100%.
comfortable and you got everything solved, you kind of just stop and call it there.
Yeah. Like I'm like super OCD, and I think like I have a hard time making decisions, and sometimes that bites me in the butt because like sometimes I'm always like last minute doing I'm always doing everything last minute, like last minute submitting my deck list last minute, like because like I cannot make decisions until like the very deadline. But because of that, like it makes my eventual decision, like when I do eventually make my decisions, it's like I know I put like all of the thought and time I could possibly put into them. So in a way, it kind of helps.
At some point, you just got to
Yeah.
back yourself and trust yourself, right? And you got to go, okay, I've done as much as I possibly can do.
Hmm.
Let's just
Yeah.
go for it now.
Hmm. Hmm. I'm never able to like say that. I literally like I always like try to tell myself that, and then I'm just like, no, I have to keep thinking. And then like then when the deadline eventually comes, you're just forced to like go with what you got. Then it's like, okay, now I've been forced to make a decision, and now I'm at peace because now it's over. And then like once I submit my deck list, I don't even think about Yu-Gi-Oh for the like usually Friday morning, like the whole next like 24 hours, I'm not even like I don't even think about Yu-Gi-Oh, like not even like a minute. Like I'm if someone brings them up, I'm like, my deck's already done. I don't want to talk about that. Like, and then yeah.
I think that's a good way to put it. Otherwise, you start second guessing yourself over something you can't
Hmm.
even change, and then
Right.
you
So once
just
you
start
can't change it,
spiraling.
right?
And
And
then
it's yeah.
if you're thinking about it in the tournament, oh, what if I change this and this, and then yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's bad
And
mindset.
then as far as like the actual practicing, testing, like usually by that point I've already done so much that's like, all right, like I don't need to practice Friday afternoon because I've already put a lot of time into practicing. So usually by that point I'm good, and then we're good to go. And then comes the event, and either we do good or we do bad. And sometimes we do bad, but sometimes we do good. So.
Yeah, it's the hands. You got to play with the hands you're given. A lot of these times, even
Hmm.
though you've like put in so many hours of playing real matches and playing these very niche scenarios, a lot of times you're playing very common game states. You just really need the playable hand just to execute. You're going
Hmm.
for no hand traps, just set up the board, or you get ash or you get imperm, just set up the board that you know how to make that you're going to do most of the time.
Yep.
Make sure you've got
Yep.
that nailed down. I wanted to ask because you said you were unsure on some things. Did you have a tier list in your head, and was there decks that you 100% crossed out and that you knew were not the best deck and not viable?
I did have a tier list, and that I was testing a little bit. I think because of all the limits to tier in at Worlds format. I'm just joking. I knew what you meant, but I said
Oh,
I'd run with
oh,
it. No,
fair.
you meant a tier list as in like a
The
ranking of
accent.
decks, right? Not
Yeah.
tier element.
Maybe it's the
Yeah,
accent.
no.
Maybe it's
The
the accent.
ICG
But
players
yeah.
played it. It's not that out there.
Yeah, they did. I actually played against Tournament round one against the Chinese representative. We had a good match. We went to game three. I bricked game three, and then had to pass with a strike and an ash and another hand trap. But I got there. And then
Okay.
turn three, I drew something that was live. It was a fun match. But no, as far as a tier list, like a ranking of the decks, I thought that the main three decks I was testing the most in the time leading up to the event were Dragon, Vanadium, and Rika. I just felt like those were all solid combo decks that had especially Rika and Vanadium. I think just had really really high ceilings and like were just good all around decks. They didn't have any hits to them at the event, and and I knew I wanted to play something combo esque. Just because I feel like a lot of times the OCG players lean more toward control. I think. Although this year, I mean, they were mostly playing. A lot of them were playing Tear, Element, and Branded, which wasn't really that control-y. So I guess it was a mix. But my idea was kind of like, if a lot of people play Control, just in general, if you have like a solid combo deck and you know how to play it, I think you can sometimes do well in a field of a lot of Control. Whereas if everyone plays combo, your mirrors can be iffy, and then maybe you don't want to play combo. But I felt like combo would be like a good pick for Worlds. And Vanadium and Rika were kind of two that I was looking at the most. But I found through testing that like Vanadium has like no grind game. It's very kind of glass cannony. You make it for a board turn one, and if they break it, you have almost no chance of recovery whatsoever. And Rika has a very good grind game, but felt very fragile to hand traps at certain points in the combo. Which is I know a lot of people feel that Rika's not that vulnerable to hand traps because it's like, oh, you have Princess, you can just get hand trap, but like being able to actually set up Princess and then do Loki combo doesn't actually happen that often. I feel like so. Like Nib a lot of times is really good. Like Nib's actually one of my favorite cards against Rika, which is like counterintuitive because a lot of people think Nib's bad against them because of Princess, but like, I feel it's very good. And then like even just other hand traps, like any combination of two hand traps, oftentimes felt like it could make Rika end on just like a really really low board. So I wanted to play Rika, but it just didn't feel Like it just, like I said, just felt a little bit too fragile. And then in the end, I just ended up going with Dragon because it was the deck that I had kind of been like, it was one of the other main decks I had been testing throughout the period, and just was like, all right. Generally, I always feel you should go with the deck that you're the most comfortable with and that you have the most playtime with, as long as it's like within reason of like, still like a good, as long as we're not talking about like battery men or something, right? So I was like Dragon, and Dragon was the deck I really had been putting the most time in with, and it was a solid deck. Wasn't quite as high ceiling as Rika or Vanadium, but I thought it was a good, just a solid all around choice. And the Bestials also like are, because you still have 6 Bestials in the main. The Bestials were good into like a lot of the decks, like other decks in the format, like just because of the the Crow interaction. So against like Vanadium, arguably Labyrinth, against Tear for sure, against Branded, against a lot of these other decks in the format, the Bestials are kind of just like a nice plus.
There was 2 Math Mechs in top 8 that I also thought Dragon Link.
I'm sorry, Math Mech. Yes, I knew there was another one I wasn't thinking of. Yeah, Math Mech as well. The Bestials, that was a really good deck. I think without the Bestials, that probably would have been a bad matchup. For sure. That deck, I think, was a really good choice for the event.
Also, very good counters against arguably the best deck in the room that day, ABC. Oliver Newton with ABC.
I love Oliver Newton. Shout out to Oliver Newton, but I don't know about his deck choice. But that's okay. Okay. I'm sure he had fun. But no, I think Math. Yeah, I knew some of the Americans were testing Math Mech going into the event, so I knew that there were gonna be at least a couple there. And I knew that was like a really good deck, but Dragon. I knew Dragon was like solid against it because of the Bestials. It was like pretty 50-50. I lost to Enzo, and he like, that was like my hardest match for sure of the week, and he crushed me. Like I made a full board twice, and he played through. I'm pretty sure. I was like, damn. So yeah, Math Mech was a good. Enzo's also a really good player, but Math Mech was a good deck. And then yeah, so I just thought, but overall, all around, I felt Dragon was a solid choice. And yeah, that was kind of my process. I tested a lot, like I said, 135 hours in 3 weeks. So I know that because my phone, I do all my testing on DB, and my phone tells me the screen time thing. Yeah, so on your phone it shows like screen time, like if you go into settings, you can see like how much time you spent in each app. So like for me, I was able to go and it said like duelingbook.com, like it would tell me how many minutes I spent each day, and I added it up at the end of the 3-week period between WCQ and Worlds, and it was 135 hours. So
wait, wow. Now you're world champion. Can you see yourself getting a laptop or a PC?
Why do I need that?
Oh, superstition, maybe. You've been winning on your phone. I guess we're not going to change it. But yeah, I really liked the decks you considered. Like those decks for me look like the best value. Like some cards are better than others. You go first with these decks. The board you set up is better than, I would say, something like Tier Element or Branded. These decks also, I feel like, especially Dragons, like you had the flexibility of playing so much non-engine to just be able to give yourself the chance of winning going second.
Right.
I felt like playing something like Tier, sure, you give yourself maybe the chance of winning going first, but I don't see how it can.
Right. Tier, definitely. I think Tier is like especially like particularly bad when it comes, not bad, but particularly like can play like very low amount of non-engine, right? And probably Branded too, like probably can play with the second least amount of non-engine. At least Branded has Bestials in the main though, but yeah, Terra for sure. Like just it was still, even with all the limits, it was still a really good deck, but it had a little bit of consistency issue, arguably because of the milling factor and the limits. And yeah, like you said, just not being able to play a lot of non-engine. I feel like some of the best choices for the event were like the decks that could play like the most non-engine. So like I think the 3 decks that could play the most non-engine that we tested were like, it was Marincess, Math Mech, and Pearly. I think my video just can't cut out, my bad. But Marincess, Math Mech, and Pearly, all of which I think were good decks to potentially play for the event. Marincess has a little bit of a low ceiling on its own combo, so that's an issue. Pearly has some consistency issues itself because Prosperity was limited at Worlds, and as was Sleepy Memory. So like arguably just Pearly would have lost a little consistency, and going first sometimes you would just like lose to one hand trap. Pearly ended up testing really good as like a go second deck actually against a lot of the combo decks, but Pearly was actually a deck I considered playing specifically only as a go second deck, but I didn't feel comfortable just playing a go second deck in general into such an open field. Way too risky.
Like if you're trying to win the event, putting yourself on go second, I feel like maybe you lose a lot of edge. Maybe you want to say your goal is the top, but trying to win and your opponent wins Dyro.
Yeah, like in testing, Pearly literally had like a 75 to 80% win rate going second against Rika and Dragon, which was insane. I was like, wow, this is like a really good counter pick. But I'm like, I'm gonna go to the event and I'm not going to play Dragon Rico all day. I'm going to play like a branded player or like a Terra player, and I'm going to be like, well, I just have no chance going second. So I decided that wasn't really a viable option. But Mathmech was probably the best hand trap deck of those three, and as we saw, it did well. So
Yeah, I agree with you completely
yeah.
on your thoughts on Worlds, and I think it helped you a lot in your win, of course, like having a really good grasp of what the best decks are. And in short, it must help with your deck building in order to decide what to respect. Because I'm sure when you played matches, maybe if you consider deck low value, maybe you considered it less in your side deck and main deck when choosing what cards to play against it.
Yeah, I will say for as far as that I kind of ended up just going with like the most across the board like generic options that I could in both the main and the side. So literally ended up deciding like I had infinite impermanences in my side with Veilers in my main. To give an example of how much I like to lean toward just broad coverage, I thought about playing Contact C for the event in my side because it's really good against Rika, really good against Rika. Because they almost always their entire extra is almost always plants that they have no outs. And all the cards that tribute, they're like they specify you have to tribute a plant or an opponent's monster, so there's no way for them to clear Contact C without tribute summoning over it. And against Pearly, kind of see also it just literally solos them, but they are much more likely to have like a Dark Charmer or an IP in the extra to out it. So it's like it was very risky whether or not they would be playing it out. And then decent against Mathmech, but not really because they can make transcode over it. And there's Branded it's good against. The only fusion they can make is Iron Dash. So Skynex was really good against a couple of the decks in the format potentially. But like, and I still felt Rico was one of the best decks for the event. So I really wanted to side Contact C, but I ended up just deciding like, no, like there's gonna be so many different decks in the room. I just want to have as much coverage as I can. There's gonna be some combo deck I'm gonna sit down against where I'm just going to want those Contact Cs to just be like another generic hand trap that can go in. And so I ended up just going with Imperms in the side. And then the main was like Veilers, Drolls. I was meaning Veilers, Drolls, Nibs, and Ashes. So just generic coverage. Yeah, I tend to always be kind of deferential to that. I really just like my non-engine cards to just be as like consistent as possible. I just want them to be live like every game, going first or second, like in as many matchups as they can be live, kind of thing. I cited Strike as well over like Eradicator Virus, which was what most Dragon players were citing for their go first card was Eradicator. I just felt, in testing, there were too many games where I just wouldn't see a Bestial or like I just, and it would, or like I would brick or I would get hand trapped and wouldn't be able to end on like a monster to make the Eradicator live. And so I was like, yeah, I just always I'd rather it be in general for like my go first side cards. I always want them to be something that will always be live in every game state. Like no matter what the matchup is, it can always go in. Because there's some matchups where Erad's not good even, right? So it's like Strike is always good in every matchup. It's even if you brick, it will always be live. Round like I said, round one of the tournament, I played against the Terror player and I bricked game 3. But because I had Strike set with an Ash, I was able to stop him on his turn, and I was able to draw out of it. So if that was like a Eradicator Virus, it would never have been able to I would have lost that game. So like situations like that where I just like the cards that just give the most broadest coverage.
Okay, no, I think it makes a lot of sense, especially into Worlds format, where you're kind of going into it blind. You don't
Right.
know what decks people are going to be playing. Why?
Exactly.
Play risky.
Yeah,
Why
especially
go
for
for one
Worlds
side?
format. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think James wanted to ask about the
Yeah.
OCG in general.
Yeah, so obviously this is the first year where no OCG players made top 8, and obviously it's all TCG players, which is quite something really. What do you think kind of contributed to that? Because we were talking about maybe because they don't have as many big tournaments as us. We have 3-4 YCSs a season, we have nationals, and then we have Euros, we have more regionals more often.
Content as well. There's so many really good content creators right now, especially in the recent years. A lot of the top players have started to make more content, sharing information, teaching players. And, even now, how we're talking a lot about fundamental concepts. But 5 years ago, when the YouTube scene was a bit quieter, I guess this information wasn't shared as much. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's true. As far as the OCG, I think, well, for one thing, I think we had a lot of strong TCG players there this year, who put a lot of work in, both from North America and Europe and South America and the Australians. I think there were so many good like both big name players and like lesser known players who were still really good and put a lot of work in. So I think we had a strong team, but also I think the time rules were a big thing for the OG players because this was the first year Worlds was held with the TCG time rules instead of turns. And so that's something that I think that is. I mean, think about, I don't know if you guys were playing back then, but like when the time rules first came to the TCG, it took us several events to really adapt and kind of learn how to work with that. And so that was probably a challenge for them. That might have been the biggest factor, to be honest. And also, like, there was also a big difference in deck choice. They all kind of leaned toward like Branded and Tear, and TCG leaned toward like Dragon and Rika and like some other things. So there's a couple different factors.
I think
who knows? We'll see what happens next year.
For me, looking into it, it looked like that was the biggest factor because they were playing like maybe tier 2 decks or maybe tier 1.5 decks. If you had to make a tier list of the meta, and then a lot of the TCG players were just playing Dragons, Rika, Mathmech, like good decks, good hand traps, win going first, win going second. But
yeah,
that's just from my thoughts outside.
Right. Like they chose decks that don't have as much non-engine, so it's like into that broader, more diverse field that may have been a weakness. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. I will say that it's interesting. I think for the JYCS that they just announced for November in Nairobi, or I probably just butchered that name. There's a Japan they announced for YCS for November for YCS for Japan for November. I was reading through the policy document for the tournament, and it looks like they're playing with very similar to TCG time rules. It was like It's like if you go into time in like the first rounds of Swiss, it's just like an instant draw regardless of who's up in life. I was like, that's an interesting rule. And then for like top 64, it's like if you hit time, it's you play till the end of the turn, and then whoever's up in life wins. And if it's equal, then you play one more turn, and then whoever's up in life wins. So it's very similar to like a kind of similar to how here, once it hits time, it just ends kind of thing. So maybe they're going to be maybe by next year they will be more used to that if that's how they're going to start doing some of their tournaments over there. So we'll see.
Is it a best of 3 for their YCS? Because I know
it's not. It's best of 1. It's best of 1, 25-minute rounds with those rules.
25-minute rounds.
It's tough.
25-minute best of 1, and then if you hit time, it's just a draw.
I'm pretty sure a lot of their YCS or bigger tournaments are 1 day as well. They're not 2-day events, which is why they do best of 1.
Yeah, it's a 1-day event.
So do you know if it's best of 1 for Top Cut as well, or does it split to best of 3?
It is. So it's a double elimination style tournament. It's just from the beginning straight through bracket, double elimination style. There was a reference to top 64, but I think it was referring to like once you get to the point of the bracket where there's 64 people left, rather than it cut top 64. I think it's just one bracket straight through. I could be mistaken on that part, though. I'm not 100% sure. But it was translated to English through Google through the browser translator, so it's possible I misinterpreted something, but that's what it looked like from my understanding.
So if Japan starts to have more kind of like, if Japan starts to kind of base their tournaments off of what will go forward for Worlds, do you think next year maybe they'll do a lot better because they're more used to that kind of thing? Or
they might. I'm thinking that, and now I don't know if they're going to adopt those new time rules for locals as well. So I don't know. I think they only have 2 YCSs per year in Japan, or on average. So I don't know if they'll potentially have that much experience with the new time rules by next year. I don't know exactly what their regional structure is or anything like that. I know in China they have regional-esque tournaments, but I know they do turns for those. So I don't know. Maybe they'll have a little more experience with different time rules by next year. I'm not sure. Or maybe whoever qualifies next year will hopefully recognize that that's something they have to prepare for a lot, and maybe they'll practice with like a timer or something. I don't know. I feel bad because I feel like that was a disadvantage for them this year, and I guess I would, to be honest, I would probably encourage Konami to maybe do turns for Worlds next year like it used to be, just so it's more fair for everybody. But we'll see.
Going on to the best of 1, I know they adapted the new time rules, but I think the best of 1 might put them at a disadvantage going into the Worlds competition next year, because if it's a best of 3 format, it's a massive difference in what the best decks they're playing and the best decks for a best of 3, because we're not taking into account the side deck.
Right.
It's like going 1 step forward and 1 step backwards.
Well, I think for their locals, I know they do best 2 out of 3. So I think it's just like the YCSs that are best of 1.
But do you think you learn a lot personally from YCS events? Because from TCG, I really like to see there's a 2,000-man event, insanely competitive players, and for me, it's really good to see what deck comes out on top, because you kind of like notice what key qualities give the winning deck. What happens.
Right.
And over the course of years, I've learned a lot from events in Europe and TCG on how to deck build because of these past events, and I think they might be missing out on.
Yeah, that's a great point. We do. I mean, we definitely get tons of good information from our big events. So yeah, that is another big difference. Yeah. Although in past years, that certainly hasn't hurt them because they usually tend to win Worlds. But not this year.
Not, not
Not
next
this
year,
year.
Paulie, if you're going.
We'll see. You never know.
The first back-to-back world champion. Would it be the first back-to-back?
No, there's the Japanese player.
I think.
I
Yeah,
forgot
I
his
know
name.
there's a Shinsuke Hayama, I think was his name. Something like that. Something like that. I probably butchered that too, but I tried. I'm
That's
trying,
crazy.
guys. I know he won. I don't know if it was back to back, but I know he won twice. I think it was back to back. I think it
I
was.
think it was back to back, yeah.
So
That's crazy.
yeah,
He's probably the
They're pretty
favorite
cool.
for the previous world champion. They've got like a year to prepare, get to know the OCG, get to know TCG. It's kind of
yeah.
like a massive buff, but I do like to see it. It's kind of nice.
It's cool. I mean, that for sure. I mean, I was thinking to myself, well, if I played 135 hours in 3 weeks this year, if I have several months this time,
Like,
I want to be on
Different
full
game.
power. No, I mean, you know, I'm gonna have to be testing for TCG format too for NATs and stuff. So we can't just give up on that just because we're already qualified for Worlds.
No, of
yeah.
course.
If I'm qualified for Worlds, I'm not 100% sure if I have an invite next year. I'm still waiting to hear back on that. So we'll see. Because the 2019 champion wasn't there this year. He was playing Master Duel, so I don't think he had an invite for the main event because of COVID. Because the original 2020 Worlds got canceled because of COVID, and I guess they didn't roll his invite over. So I'm like, oh, well, that sucks. And then I'm like, well, if they didn't give him one, I don't know if I could get one next year either. So I don't know. I gotta wait to see. I asked. I'm waiting to hear back hopefully about that.
Konami can be a bit of a mystery box when it comes to those things. You don't know
Sometimes.
what answer.
But I'm sure they'll let me know once they're able to or whatnot. So we'll see.
I
Interesting.
kind of wanted to ask you about, you know, you've been playing. I was watching the podcast you did with Pac, and you were saying you played 17 years in the game, and the first of
Yeah.
YCS you
Mhm.
topped, you won. And I wanted to kind of ask
Yes.
you. I'm kind of new to competitive Yu-Gi-Oh. What was the kind of
Okay,
turning point,
cool.
would you say, for yourself that made you kind of click, you know, to go from nothing to winning, you know?
It's hard to say because like I'm sorry, did you want to say something, Marcus?
Oh no, 100%.
Oh.
I wanted to talk about your 17 years in the game. Like this is one of the key talking points I think we wanted to have because there's so much to learn across your career in Yu-Gi-Oh! And Yu-Gi-Oh! Memories for me tend to stick really well. I don't know if it's something traumatic about them. Like I could tell you about events vividly like 10 years ago, 11 years ago that I
Yeah.
played. It's so crazy.
Yeah, well, I think there's a factor, like, I don't know if it's like recognized in psychology, but at least something that I've noticed is like, I tend to find that when I'm the most stressed out or like anxious, whatever tends to be happening in those moments tends to be like burned into memory more. So like I'll tend like if at any point like I was like particularly stressed or particularly like had like adrenaline, let's say, or whatever, like I find that like we tend to be more memory retentive of those moments versus when we're calm. So I would imagine that's the correlation because at Yu-Gi-Oh events we're probably like, you know, we're having like adrenaline the whole weekend. We're super
Yeah.
hyped. We're super stressed. We're excited. So that's probably why like we remember those like we probably remember events so vividly. Yeah, and I know what you mean. As far as the 17 years I've been playing, and was there a turning point? I never really felt like there was a particular turning point where like I was like, oh, I get it now. It was just, you know, it's just a process. It was just like a long process, I guess. For a couple of years before I finally got my first like top, let's say I definitely felt like I had finally gotten to a point where I felt like I was, you know, good at the game and a lot happier with where I was around like maybe 20, I think 2016 was when I got my first ARG top. That was in the US at the time. I talked about it a little bit on Pack Stream, but it was another kind of very competitive circuit that took place in the US where they would have like big events, like premier events every month or so, and a lot of big players would fly to them. That was like my first like big success. And I ended up getting, I think I had like 8 ARG tops throughout until they stopped doing those. And like, so I already kind of had like some success, just not like, because I didn't really travel a lot. I only went to like usually one YCS each year plus NATs for like most of those years, if that. So finally when I was able to start traveling, I started, you know, finally having some Konami success. But so yeah, even kind of before that, like I said, I already kind of had felt like I had started to improve and have some success in the game. My friends used to joke with me like that, like, how do you not have a top yet? And I was like, oh, and then they used to say like, oh, when you finally top, you're gonna win on your first top. And I was like, that's not gonna happen. And then it happened. So you never know what can happen. But it was a long process. It was a long journey.
No, it's something I strongly believe because I've got like I've been playing the game for a long time and I've had encounters with so many amazing players. And whenever they do well, people are quick to judge. Oh, in that 1 year, they just instantly became an amazing player overnight. And like you really have to see them testing like testing every event, learning from the previous event, and that knowledge just
Yeah.
rolls over, and they eventually get to the point where they understand the game so well that they can just go to an event top. And I think people are quick to react and think, oh my gosh, what did he do in this 1 year? What changed for him? When I think it's more of like a long journey of continuously trying to
Yeah,
learn.
I 100% agree with that. Yeah, that's perfectly put.
I guess following on from that, then, do you think there was any kind of points where you kind of had to get over certain barriers within the game? You know, do you think there was
Um,
points where you kind of stagnated in your learning or how good you were doing, and then you kind of found a new barrier to get over, and then that kind of allowed you to continue?
hmm. Yeah, there definitely were some. I think. Well, so one was like, I mean, one was like, I guess a personal thing. I part of the reason I couldn't travel for a long time was for like health reasons. I had a very restricted diet because of like food allergies. So I like if I wanted to go to an event, I had to bring like 4 days worth of food with me from home, which was very hard to do on an airplane. So like that was why I couldn't really travel for long. So I guess that was like a personal barrier that I've so like and everyone has their own potential like personal barriers that we're not aware of each other. So, you don't know what someone else might be going through, why they might be struggling more than others, or what extra barriers they might have. So, like, that's, I guess, something to always keep in mind. When like looking at others, it's like we shouldn't judge each other too much because you never know what barriers each person has. But as far as like within the game, to answer your question, definitely one, I guess, for me was stamina, like in-person stamina, because like I said, before I traveled to a lot of events and when I went to just like ARGs, which were not as quite as big and long as YCSs, and when I kind of a lot of my testing time was just on Dueling Book. I used to grind rated back in the day, 2 NDBs. That was like a lot of my gameplay. Going from that to actual, long 2 day in-person events like YCSs and WCQs, it's even if even if your technical play is really good and you've practiced and your deck's good, like just the aspect of being able to stay focused and not losing to fatigue throughout the weekend is like a skill that. So for me personally, that was one of the things I struggled with. I found when I did start traveling finally a lot, and let's say at the events I did go to when I was going more infrequently, like just fatigue. Like if I didn't sleep well, if I don't even now sometimes if I don't sleep well before like the night before an event, like that's a huge thing for me. Like getting good sleep, I find like there will be a point like midday one where I just crash and just can't focus. So I've definitely like after going to a lot of events over the past year and a half, though that is something that like I've improved on to where I feel happy that I kind of that's like I guess one of those like barriers that I kind of overcame. Um, some of the events I've done well, I certainly did not sleep well due to nerves or roommates or whatever, and was still including worlds and like Costa Rica last year where I got second. Didn't sleep well there, but was still able to do well. Um, so that's like yeah, definitely that was one for me. That was like a big barrier that I guess I finally like overcame sort of. Um, so yeah, it's very sometimes it's things like that that you wouldn't think of. You never know what your own personal barriers are until well, a friend actually is who pointed it out to me recently. She was like, I remember you used to be like so out of it by the end of day one, and you would like bubble for day, and I'd be like, yeah, you're right. And she was like, yeah, I'm like happy that like lately like you've seemed like way better with that. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. That's a good point.
What tips
It
could
was
you give
interesting.
to maybe someone that might also be struggling with the same barrier?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. It depends on like like I said, everyone's personal barriers are different, but I think some big ones are that, right? So like just try as much as you can to like really make a goal to get good sleep before an event, or also like and like eat. A lot of people like don't eat or drink during events, and like that's an important thing. Um, but and then as far as like gameplay, my main advice I always give to players is practice as much as you can. That's the most important thing, even over theory. I think just putting the hours in and practicing and testing is really big. um if your barrier is nerves, because that's another one for a lot of people, I would say just practice in testing with a clock, right, instead of just normal untime, as well as practicing without a clock, because that's also really really important. So you have to do both if you want to do that. And yeah, it really depends because everyone has their own barriers and there's different advice for every hurdle. But those are some of the things that I've, worked on, like I said. So
I want to talk about some of the ones I had. I don't know if you maybe can
I want to hear.
relate. So I started playing this game 14 years ago, and there I started doing a bit well in the local area, and I started maybe doing a bit well at one or two YCSs. But one thing for me, sometimes I would do well at an event, and it'll go to like 3 or 4, 6 months of me not doing well. And one of the things it took me a while to notice was the deck I played actually had a massive impact on my results. I don't know if you also had this too. Like I would even play a lot, spend so much time playing a deck, and I'll go to the event, and I felt like I knew how to play my deck perfectly, but I couldn't get the results. And I think what changed is me trying to understand, oh, if I change the deck I play, I give myself a better 5 cards to draw, which dramatically increase how well I do it. And I went, as soon as this like changed, I felt like I could start going deeper into the tournament, like go to day 2 because my deck is just better, go to make top card because my deck is better. I don't know if that switch changed for you, or you always recognize you're always playing the best deck from the
It's
beginning.
interesting because that's a very interesting point because I have to say I almost feel like I've come to like the opposite conclusion over the years. So I
Okay.
always say like I used to very much focus on like my goal in testing was always to find the best deck, right? To find the
Hmm.
best deck with the best matchups and the best meta call for the event. And a lot of events I still feel would have correctly identified the best deck, but at the tournament just wouldn't do that well because I was playing the best deck, but it wasn't the deck that I had put the time in with, and I didn't know it in and out as well as let's say a different deck that maybe wasn't quite as good or as perfect of a matchup, but that I just knew in and out and had like a really refined deck list, knew all the siding patterns, knew all the matchups, knew all the interactions. And so now I've come to the realization I always play the deck that I know the best, that I've put the most time in with over if there's a conceptual best deck that I think is theoretically a better call, but that I haven't put the time in with, I'll always go with the deck that I know the best personally over the best deck, let's say. But it's kind of like I don't know, it's weird. So I've almost had the opposite um kind of revelation. So I don't know. But I think
No,
it probably depends on the context. Like for what I'm saying to work, you have to, the deck the best still has to be a good deck, right?
yeah,
And like and and conversely, like with what you were saying, if you stick with or like let's say we're
it
sticking with,
is.
the deck the best, if it's a bad deck
Yeah.
or not as good, if it's just isn't good enough, even no matter how much time you put in with it, it might just not be able to get there. So I guess it depends on the context and how far we're going into how deep we're going into those concepts.
Yeah, and the second barrier, I don't know if you might also relate to this, is I feel like to win the event or to go really deep, you need to figure out what the best non-engine is to play in the deck. Because you might have the best deck, and you might
Yes.
recognize everyone's rolling up with Cash to the tournament. But if you've given yourself the worst non-engine Cash cards to draw, you will lose in top cut against
Hmm.
someone that's making free talent,
Yes.
free econ, and it's like if you can't recognize this and you say, okay, I'm playing really amazing with my Cash, I'm going to locals, and I'm doing well. Yeah, that's something that also clicked in my head. I can't just play the best deck. I have to find the best variant of the best deck. So when I
Yes.
go to top
Hmm.
cut, I can, run deep.
100%. Like
I
with
don't know.
cash.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
No, I didn't know if that was something maybe you changed to recognize what the best non-engine was. For me, there was definitely a period where I was playing the best deck, but I didn't really know how to choose what cards were. Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely a thing. Like I said myself, I kind of over time kind of came to the realization of I just like to have, like I said, as much broad coverage as I can. Whereas in the past, maybe I think in the past, like I would a lot of times build my main like very focused on just like beating the mirror, let's say, right? Or like the top one or two matchups that I thought were like the best decks. And then I would just face like everything else in Swiss. And just my non-engine would just be dead, and it's just like, and there's still an argument to be made for that strategy because some people argue like, it's worth taking disadvantage in Swiss to have a better advantage in Top Cut when you're more likely to play mirrors. But I definitely I just like to have my decks be as consistent and have as much coverage as possible. So like with Cash, like you mentioned, Cash and non-engine spots. Like for the 250th YCS, I played my rule was I wanted all my non-engine in the main to be always live, both first and second. So that was like so for example, Econ, which was also really good in the mirror, so there's double advantage to it. But like it's a card that is good first and second. Whereas like evenly matched, which was a popular main, or Gamma. A lot of my friends were really hyped on Gamma for the 250th, and I was like, I really,
No.
really don't feel comfortable playing Gamma because, like, first of all, not only is it's just dead, it's just dead, gonna be dead going first. So you're just gonna be playing with one less card every game. Cashier has no discard outlets, so you will be able to get no. You won't even be able to like discard it, and like in Cashier, especially, like it felt like a lot of times because everyone's building their deck to be able to break the Cashier board, it's like it's really important that that last card in your hand or that non-engine spot is something that when they break your board or attempt to, it's something that can back up your board and stop them. And if it's just like a Gamma, it's just like you can't afford for that last card to be dead. So I was very against maining like Gamma or evenly, or conversely maining like go first cards like the Solemns. I would never main those. But that said, the Australians all mained like 6 Solemns and they all made top 16 at that event, all 3 of them, which is insane. So maybe that was actually correct. But in any case, no, so I didn't want to do like evenly or Gamma or things like that. So like I made my non-engine was like Talons, Econ. I think I don't remember if I played Mourner at that event or not, but like cards like that, I wanted just cards that will always be live in every situation and matchup. So that's definitely a thing. I've like it's that concept is something that definitely like I came to over the years. I definitely used to maybe tunnel more toward just building for the mirror or for one matchup and then underestimating all the other matchups.
That makes sense. I think for me, like I said, I'm kind of new to competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! I've only been playing this season, this
Okay.
past season. And for
Okay.
me, one of the
Cool.
biggest barriers
Cool.
that I had was, I joined Disciples, or like I started hanging around with these guys and I started testing with them and just getting around to productive testing. Beforehand, if I was
Yes.
going to an event, I would spend maybe the day testing on DB, but more recently, I found I could spend 10 hours beforehand testing on DB and learn half as much as I would in an hour nowadays, just because I've learned how to productively test. I've learned how to, use my time effectively. One of the main things is like,
Mm-hmm.
um, beforehand, if I had a new non-engine card I wanted to test out, I'd just chuck it in my deck and run a load of games. But now I'm like forcing it into good hands, forcing it into bad hands, figuring out like
Right.
where it's good, where it's bad, if it's needed, or even just like reviewing replays. It only takes 5 minutes to review a replay, but you learn way more from that than just running another game, I feel like. So I don't know, is that something you used to do where you like suddenly you were using your time better and just learned loads more?
Yeah, I mean, that came from me more a number of years ago, but definitely there was a time where like I loved going to locals. I would just go to locals, all the time, and that was mainly, my Yu-Gi-Oh was mainly just going to locals, or maybe playing DB, but like it was just like I'd be playing like I wasn't like actively playing DB with the purpose of like contemplating like my deck or like it would just be more casually, and definitely like once I started, for me, I think around 2016 when I first really started feeling like I was getting better at the game was right around when I started doing a lot of it. I would take 2 decks like that I had built in person. Like I think it was Shadow and Necros at the time. And I would just play them against each other. Like I would just play against myself over and over and over and over and over. And like that was like kind of maybe my first experience with like real in-depth like testing because I was playing against myself. I had all the time in the world to be like, was that the right move? Let me go back. Let me try that. Let me see if that was right. And like, actually, if I do this, but if he does this, I'm playing it like, well, but I do this and I do this, and the other player, but then does this and does this, and it's like, let me go back and try that. And like, that was like, and that's like I always say, when I give advice to players, like when you play on DB with your friend in testing, that's how you should be doing it. The goal is not to win, the goal is to learn. So it's like you want to go back, you want to explore all the lines, you want to like take as much time as you can to like explore everything. And my first experience that was actually just playing against myself with physical decks. And then, after that, I applied that to Dueling Book, to my testing sessions. And yeah, that's kind of how I learned to really test like properly like that. Yeah, there's definitely a big difference. Because yeah, that's like the main way I put it to people. The goal is not to win, the goal is to learn in testing. Because a lot of players like they'll play and they'll be testing, right? But they'll just be playing games and if like you misplay, it's like, oh, it's like, my opponent misplayed, now I got him. But it's like, no, when you're testing, that's not how you should be looking at it. You should be collaborating, right? So that's like a big thing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I guess going off that, what do you think would make someone like a good testing partner? If you were to give people out there advice on how they can test
Um,
better with their friends, or how they can be better in just being a testing partner and making that circle.
I mean, ideally, if you know someone who is a veteran player or an experienced player who's willing to work with you, you can learn so much just from seeing how they do it and learning those practices. But if you're just with your friends and you guys are starting out and you're trying to improve, definitely, like I said, like in your games, Like if you see something, sometimes it's hard. Like if you, well, first thing would be, I guess, like, like when you're playing, don't just like really consider all the options. Take your time. You're not on the clock like you are in a tournament setting, right? When you're just testing, you're not on the clock, so you take your time. Um, think like if you if you have the opportunity, or if you think of it, think back like, did I play that game correctly? Like, was there something different I could have done? Or, if you see your friend who you're playing against made a mistake, point it out. Because that's the perfect gateway for like a conversation or a discussion about like what a better line could have been. It's sometimes easier to notice when your opponent made a mistake than it is to notice when you made a mistake. Right. So like definitely if your friend, like if you see something, point it out, discuss it, start a discussion. And that's a great way to start discussions and start helping each other improve. Even if you're maybe more beginner players, or like I said, neither of you are really veterans, that's a great way to spark those conversations and start practicing that more in-depth way of testing. So that's something I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, even at locals, I would always say, after the game, if you've lost, not like, don't just pick up your stuff and walk away. Try and figure out like why
Oh
you've
yeah.
lost. Like, even if you're
Yeah.
doing it by yourself or talking to your opponent, saying, what do you
Right.
think I could have done differently? Because do it at the end of the match, because they're probably not going to tell you in game two, like, oh yeah, if you'd
Oh
played this
yeah.
way, you're going to
Yeah.
beat me. But at the end of the match, just say like, what can I do? What could I have done? Was there a different card I could have hit with this hand trap? If I'd held the hand trap
Yeah.
for this, like, ask the questions. If you're not asking questions, you're not going to learn, right?
100%. Yeah, exactly. 100%. 100%. Yeah, I know. Definitely, that's a good thing when you lose. Definitely think back and try to, even if you can't talk to your opponent, just think about what you maybe could have done better. Or I always do that. Like whenever I lose, I'm sitting there for like 5 minutes after, and then someone comes over like, "You all right, bro? You're just sitting here." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm thinking. I'm trying." They're like, "You all right?" I'm like, "No, I lost." No, I'm just kidding. But I'm just thinking, I'm trying to figure out what I could have done. And there's almost always like something that you can, not always, but like I would say like 80% of the time, there's something you can identify that if you had done differently, you could have won potentially. So um, it's always good to try to identify those things and then be able to apply them for the future.
I wanted to ask, do you do this thing where when you lose a match, and maybe at YCS, do you ever just sit down at the table and just replay the whole match in your head? I know it's something I do. Um,
Oh yeah, that's
like,
what I was. That's what
yeah, I know
that's what I'm talking
exactly.
about.
Yeah, yeah, I didn't know, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just crazy. You just sit down and you're like, "Ah, where did it go wrong?"
Yep. No, exactly. Usually there's like one point. Usually like in the tournament when I like make like usually pretty quickly after I make the mistake, I can recognize like, oh, that was probably a mistake, and then at the end like I'll go back to that point and then let's say like replay the game from that point, right? Like okay, if I'd done this instead, what would have happened? And then I'll try to think about it.
No, I
Yeah.
It's
appreciate your
always
insight.
fun. Not actually fun. It's kind of down bad, but it's good.
I think eventually it'll pay off and then it's fun, right? And then it's
Yeah,
considered fun.
yeah.
It's character building. That's what I call it. Character building to the next round. Uh, one thing I wanted to talk to you about was
Yeah.
uh, an area above competitive edge. I know we've touched on how to test playing the game. It was the more so the
Uh-oh.
mentality
Oh,
of
sorry.
going into the
You cut out just for a second. I'm sorry. Could you restart that from competitive?
Oh,
That's where I
yeah,
heard it was
good, good.
competitive.
Yeah, sorry about that. It was, I wanted to talk about the topic of competitive edge. It's something I personally am like invested into and trying to find ways to give myself some sort of edge in big tournaments because it's so hard. You're competing against players with 10 plus years
Yeah.
of experience, veterans in the game, and you're trying to beat them. And I personally always try to think of different ways that I could do something cool or maybe do things in a different way. I don't know, is this something you think of consistently, or do you try to level up and then try to find new ways of doing things?
Um, I tend to um um I definitely do, just not necessarily with deck building. Like a lot of players, you should look at it as they'll try to find, some tech card or some engine or deck choice that, you know, catch people off guard or is just really good into the meta to try to gain advantage from that, from something in the deck. Um, like I've said, I tend to always lean more toward the standard options. I usually, whenever there's like a hot tech card, I like sit down, I analyze it, and I almost always end up coming to the conclusion that it's just not good. I'm probably too critical of new ideas in that sense. I'm very hypercritical when I analyze things. So maybe there's probably been plenty of good tech options that were good that I dismissed prematurely. But I more focus on, I just look at it as my even if I have the same deck as everyone else, my focus is I want to be able to go in knowing that I practiced more than everyone else. So that's where I try to take my edge, might gain the edge from, let's say, not necessarily from the deck building, but just from knowing, like, I think a huge part of modern Yu-Gi-Oh is just knowing just as many interactions as you can, like in all as many matchups, and just like having all the side patterns down, having practiced all the side patterns and optimized them, having optimized your build, and just going in with as much knowledge as you can. And that's where I try to, that's why I try to always motivate myself and remind myself, you have to test, you have to practice, even if I don't feel like it. 'Cause it's like, you know what? Because that's where I remind myself my edge can come from when I go to the tournament. So that's kind of the aspect that I focus on. But it's not to say that trying to get an edge from deck building is wrong. It's certainly not wrong. It's very beneficial too. So everyone, but definitely, like, we all want to, definitely, it's good to try to find something to focus on to to be able to give yourself an edge, because to win you have to have some kind of edge.
So getting back to the topic of competitive edge, I think there's a lot of edge in teamwork, and I know this is what I personally am trying to push in my team, is improving the way that we work, because there's only so much time that we have before an event. Maybe the new ban list drops. You've only got 1 week to prepare. If we're able to maybe leverage everyone's time and information, I think we can get to like the correct solutions a lot faster. And this is like I would say our competitive edge right now. We're trying to find the best deck, learn the best deck, and also be able to teach the best deck. Because I have a friend, Henry. He was playing Kashtira, and he kind of figured out all the best lines and all the best ways to play the mirror. Instead of me individually going off and trying to figure this out, he just kind of gave it to me on a plate and spoon-fed me this information. And now, once I had this information, I could kind of look into it from like a fresh pair of eyes, going from like a very good fundamental point. I don't know. I know you said you test with Hani a lot, and I can imagine he must have given you a massive edge, into the world's tournament. And I don't know if this is something you're pushing towards, maybe trying to.
No, definitely. No, definitely. Teamwork and collaboration is huge. Like you said, like if one person has been practicing with the deck a lot, you definitely can't play a deck just based off information that's been given to you. You still have to, I think, hands-on practice it a certain amount yourself, just to, like, at least I find personally, if someone tells me, let's say, like, all right, in this situation, if this happens, you do this, there's a good chance when it actually happens the first time, I'm going to mess it up. So, but once I've gone through it once, usually I'll then at that point be good with it. But definitely, like, there is benefit in, like you said, let's say someone's been practicing a deck, and let's say you know nothing about the deck, right? Let's say the first time you sit down, if they're with you to like walk you through the lines, that saves a huge amount of time, right? So there's definitely areas where, like, having a partner to work with and someone who can, it definitely overall is absolutely huge. So like I said, there's some amount of practice that you still have to have to do yourself before the tournament, but having a teammate or a friend who can help is definitely saves like a huge amount of the time. And it's definitely really beneficial. I agree. Like, just having good people to work with is huge, and it's good because we help each other.
Yeah,
so.
I think a testing partner also has to be enjoyable, because like when you're surrounded by friends, it's crazy for me like how my friends kind of force me to play Yu-Gi-Oh. Like I'm just around my friends and we're like, oh, let's talk about Yu-Gi-Oh because I enjoy it. Let's play Yu-Gi-Oh because I enjoy it, and it's definitely one of for me the driving factors that has pushed me to be better at the game. And I think it's one of the biggest things that can push you to be one of the better players.
Yeah, I mean,
game.
Definitely.
I mean, for us, like, we might not even be talking Yu-Gi-Oh, but we just join Discord. We just talk. Well, we're friends outside of Yu-Gi-Oh, obviously. So we jump on Discord. We're just talking, and then Marcus might join and go, "Oh, guys, do you hear? What do you think about this list that came out?" And then all of a sudden we're talking about Yu-Gi-Oh, but we're not forced into that situation. We just enjoy each other's company, and we have that shared common goal. So it's nowhere near like a chore to talk about it. It's enjoyable, and you learn more when it's not a chore as well, and you're not forcing yourself to do something.
100%, definitely. Yeah.
So I think like joining a competitive team just changes the whole view. Not just a competitive team, actually. Maybe just joining a group of friends that share a common goal.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't have to be a team, just a group of friends. You guys are all motivated together, 100%.
I think, I know the Disciples, for instance, just started out as a group of friends that went to regionals, and then they went to nationals, and then YCSs, and then just that common goal's always been there. So obviously the skill level is always going to go up as long as you're helping each other. So it's really nice to see. But kind of in terms of goals for you, what are your next goals now? Because you've done it all. You know, you've won a YCS, you've won World. So
You finished the game.
yeah,
What's the next level?
and you kind of
Everyone keeps
speed run it as well. Like it's not that long ago that you got your first win, then you got your second, and now World. You know.
yeah. It was my first top was a win. My third top was a second place. My fourth top was a win, and then I got my fifth top, and then I won the playoff, and then I won fourth. I mean, for the next step, I don't know. I mean, I gotta keep. I mean, I'm gonna keep competing. I definitely want. I'm definitely like still feel like super motivated right now to keep like. I want to go to as many YCS as I can this season. I want to. I mean, I guess the big goal is gonna be try to go back to back, right? I'm gonna test as much as I can next year, but I mean, statistically that would be very unlikely. But we're gonna try. We're gonna try our best. And then yeah, I'm just gonna hopefully maybe you never know, maybe pick up another YCS win this year would be really cool. So we're gonna try.
Are you the kind of player that
I got friends who got 5, so I still got catch up to do.
are you the kind of player that really enjoys kind of just going from event to event? Like you don't kind of set yourself anything like, oh, there's 4 YCSs coming up, I have to top 4 of them, or do you just go, okay, first YCS, let's get that out of the way, and then think about the next?
I mean, I'd like to top, a certain percentage of them, let's say, but sometimes doesn't work out that way. I've had some pretty bad streaks even within the past year and a half. So, I just usually when I do bad at one, it kind of motivates me more. Like, all right, well now I have to make up for that one to keep my top rate up. So it motivates me. Yeah. So but yeah. So I just kind of each one's important to me. So
Yeah.
I just look at it.
That's fair enough. I think sometimes goals, for me personally, like in the past, I've kind of set myself goals and they kind of done the opposite of motivate. They demotivated me because maybe you don't reach those goals and you put so many hours into them, and then they really ruin your mental. And I think that was going back to kind of barriers that you have to overcome. I think as a newer competitive player, setting those goals can sometimes be demotivating and do the opposite, and really after the event you feel really down. But I think it's important to remember, personally for me, I'm now taking it event to event. I'm not really thinking about what the event is, if it's a regional or YCS, nationals or Euros. I'm just kind of thinking, okay, round by round, need to do as best as I can do, instead of if I don't top this, all that time's wasted or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's never really wasted, right? Because most formats, even if they change, a lot of the decks you're still gonna be seeing a lot of the same decks from the prior format. So whatever all that time you put in, one good way of looking at it is like, well, that's still time that like practicing those reps against those decks. It's still in your memory bank for like the next event. So even if you do bad, it's like there's still always some value from that testing time for the next event. So you should never feel like it was wasted.
Yeah, I think learning from mistakes is just something you've just got to do, right? Like you're never going to get 100%. Better if you don't learn from them and you don't kind of overcome them to a certain extent.
Yeah, definitely.
Marcus, have you got anything else kind of on your talking point?
No, I think you've answered all my questions perfectly. Is there any more anything you want to talk about personally?
I think I've gone over most of the stuff I usually like to talk about. Like I said, guys, just to all the viewers, just practice when you can, and collaborate and experiment. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I think we talked about a lot of good stuff. It was fun. It
was good.
I appreciate insight, and I'm sure all the viewers appreciate your insight. There's a massive barrier to entry in this game of Yu-Gi-Oh! And
there is very much.
Who else are you going to listen to than the world champion? So.
And I guess what's the next event for you then? What have you got a YCS plan now?
Apollo?
I might skip the 3v3 YCS in Brazil just because it's a 3v3. I don't, the tickets are kind of expensive for that one from America, and I don't have like a team set, so I'm probably gonna end up skipping that one. I will be at Vancouver and I will be at Cancun, so those are gonna be the next 2 for me.
Brilliant. We'll be looking out for you there then. Oh, Marcus, you're going.
Yeah.
I'm going with a lot of the guys from the UK are going just for.
Yeah, you guys going to both or one? Which one?
We're going Vancouver and Cancun. So Vancouver's gonna be like.
And
so
then,
I'm really looking forward to it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
should be really. Yeah, I'm happy to see
And
like loads of people from US, and
and
I just love going to different continents, and it's the beauty of the game.
yeah,
It is so beautiful that the game gives you like so many opportunities to travel and meet people
are,
across the world.
are you guys going to Dortmund?
Yeah, it's gonna be a long September. It's gonna be a very yeah. I live in a house with Gabriel Nets, and he's already flew out to Brazil to see his family. So he's gonna be doing all four,
Okay,
which is gonna be
I need to
crazy.
ask you a question now. I am very confused because over the past 3 years, I've gone back and forth from trying to understand. Is he from? So he's from both. Is he a European player or a South American player? Because I swore I thought he was a European player, and then one day I was like, wait, he's Brazilian, and then one day I was like, wait, he's in Europe again. I'm so confused.
So okay, so this is actually what happened. So he was Brazilian, then he came to he's Brazilian. He's born in Brazil. Brazil his whole life. Then he came to London for his university study, and then his first year of university, he met our disciples group, and then our team is all about teamwork, competitive edge, and then he just went whoosh. Maybe we're taking
Okay,
too much of the credit, but yeah,
I get
he's
it now.
Brazilian. He just lives in the UK, in this house, like a bedroom upstairs.
Nice, nice. He built the deck that well basically built the first version of the deck that I won my
Base,
first fight test with. So
Oh,
hmm
really?
yeah, the
yeah,
base there.
based, yeah. My friend, his name's Brad, who I test with. He was like my main testing partner at the time. He's awesome. He's like brilliant player. We were testing a ton, and like a week and a half before the event, he hit me up. He was like, "Yo, there's a deck like I'm watching on DB right now. It's like I think we should look into this." And it was the base deck that Gabe had been playing, and we made some changes. We added the Plunk engine. We played crossouts and then we made some changes. But like no, that Gabe was I think the kind of the first person who created the base deck, which ended up being a huge thing in that format. So people like refer to it as my deck. They're like, oh, your base deck you made, but technically I didn't make it. Gabe Nets made the first version of that deck. So
It's quite funny.
Yeah.
Gabe's like adamant on playing 60 card based lists from now on. Ever since then, he's like every regional we go to, he's playing a different 60 card adventure synchron pile thing. And he
still
always
waiting for the
he
day
always
for it
does
to be
well
good
with them.
again. We're trying.
He
We're
always
trying.
does
What's
well
up?
with them. So like,
Good, good.
it's just the
I
Gabe
like that.
magic.
I like 60 card decks too. So
Yeah. But yeah, I think just a massive thank you, Paulie, for joining us. It's been a great
Massive,
talk.
yeah.
yeah,
Like,
thank you guys for having me. That was fun.
yeah, I mean,
Hopefully you
it's
enjoyed the conversation, and happy to spend time with us.
I know I learned a lot. I'm hoping other people learned a lot. I enjoy, you know, just talking about the game, especially with someone as
Yeah,
accredited as you. So, no, huge thank you for joining us.
thank you. All right,
Just give
guys.
a couple shout outs to like Disciples, the Brotherhood Games,
Brotherhood Games.
Hash for sending you a message and maybe getting you on the podcast. So a massive shout out to Hash. Uh, yeah, yeah, and my biggest one to Paulie, and best of luck for Vancouver and Cancun.
Thank you. Same to you guys.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys, and we'll catch you in the next episode.